this is Henry Chamberlain. Welcome to another Comics Grinder. I'm going to be discussing The Souls of Black Folk with Paul Peart-Smith. He's a cartoonist of over 20 years of a career, going back to working with 2000 AD, Sony, Marvel, a whole bunch of other companies. And I want you, Paul, to just go ahead and give us maybe a little thumbnail about yourself and about how you ended up gravitating towards Souls of Black Folk.
Oh, well, first of all, thank you, Henry. Really good to finally meet up with you, with all the time difference things that goes on with every Zoom meeting. Yeah, my name is, as Henry says, I'm Paul Peart-Smith. I've been a cartoonist since 1990. So yeah, it's been a while. And yeah, I started out on 2000 AD was my first sort of big gig. I did a couple of sort of free gigs before then, but yeah, I was given what is termed a future shock, which is a short story, which is the way they kind of like try out new talent in 2000 AD. I'd attended various of the conventions and showed my work around, and finally got that little gig, and from that I went on to getting some Judge Dredd work, Judge Hershey, and sort of spin-off character from the Judge Dredd world, and Slaughter Bowl, which was my sort of culminated in the Slaughter Bowl, which was a very 2000 AD idea with giant dinosaurs, revived dinosaurs, cybernetically enhanced with convicts on strapped to the back, racing for their lives. So I worked there for about 6 years, and then moved on to working with sort of children's, more the children end of the market. The Horrible History series, which was a series of books, spun off to a series of magazines, and they hired a whole bunch of artists to do little stints on there. So I worked there. Also did some comic strips for the Jackie Chan magazine as well, and illustrations for those stories. So it was the children's end of the market for a number of years. And then I leapt out of comics and worked in the games industry for a few years, and did various other things, and came back to the the comics industry around 2011, something like that, having done I've been a graphic designer and illustrator and done all sorts of bits and pieces. And as Henry mentioned, as you mentioned, the working for Sony, working for Jim Henson's workshop, did a little bit of work there, but also work outside of art, because it's an interesting, precarious life, the artist's life. So
Yeah,
sometimes you've got to dip in and out. So yeah, I came back to comics working for some friends who had some smaller projects. A zombie comic based in London called Edge of Extinction, with my friend Ian Maloney, and that sort of got the juices going. Actually, I'm missing out a chunk. I did a sort of a self-generated story with the Activate web collective. It was a purely online project
yeah.
called One Plus
Dean
One.
Haspiel, I think it is.
That's right, Dean Haspiel, yeah, and a number of other fantastic people. Michel Fiffe were involved, and yeah, I did this thing called One Plus One, which was a kind of a tone poem based on race and identity, and sort of turned into a more layered story about colonialism and stuff, long before the current concerns of the that are right in our face right now. And that was kind of like a real sort of breakthrough and led to this work, Souls of Black Folk, because I had done that and shown, you know, a lot of people got to see that. And then when I sort of shuffled off for a bit and did other things, that was kind of percolating. Activated then, unfortunately, it closed its doors, but the strip was remembered and was remembered by a guy named Paul Gravett, who is
Oh,
the kind of the nexus point for all things comics right across Europe and the United States. And, you know, he's just a guy who has met everybody, knows everybody, has interacted, and he is a bit of a matchmaker. And we bumped into each other over the years at various conventions and sort of had a brief chat, and he would see what I was up to, and then, you know, he'd sort of disappear again. He was sort of known as a kind of a ninja. He'd sort of turn up, he'd be in a conversation with someone, and suddenly Paul would be there, get involved, get the information he needed, and suddenly puff, in a puff of smoke, he was gone again. And I got this email from him about this gig, Souls of Black Folk, coming up. He'd been talking with Paul Boulle, who had edited a number of different adaptations of books, sort of political, with a political sort of bent. And he put me forward. Paul Gravett put me forward for this project. And so I just sent the 1+1 stuff that I did and a few other little bits and pieces. And that's how I got the gig. So it was completely out of the blue. I wasn't anything I was looking for. I was aware of W.E.B. Du Bois, of course, but not read Souls of Black Folk at that point. And it came at exactly the right time. It was just meant to be.
oh, thanks for sharing that beautiful story. Yeah, well, I'm friends with Paul Buell, so I can imagine how the two of you got along well. And I asked him, so now Paul, not him, Paul. He
Too
he
many balls.
basically he basically adapted the whole thing, and then the editors they added their little introductory notes to each chapter. Isn't that more or less how it came about? And he said yes, that basically was your baby.
Yes, it was really interesting in that I was thrown in the deep end. He gave me complete faith, which was astonishing, actually. I hadn't done any adaptation work before. I had actually worked on a short story about a crime writer, and I was doing research and sort of adapting that, but it was a very small thing and it never appeared anywhere. So this book comes along, and it was like Paul said, you know, like, you know, I hate to get in the way. You go for it. And I'm glad he did. It was God, it was such a growing experience. It was such a challenge. But firstly, it was easy to get hooked because the language is so beautiful. I mean, just jaw-droppingly beautiful. And the structure of the book made it an easy thing to get started on, because it's a series of essays which takes different aspects of the period of time just after Reconstruction. And, Du Bois did, he was like a sociologist and did a lot of work actually like on the ground, talking to people, taking thousands of notes, speaking to thousands of families. And so he had constructed his philosophy and ideas about the future of the African American through that lens, but he was able to take these different aspects and plot them into different essays. And some of them were fictional. some of them he wove his ideas into a sort of fictional thread, and others were very personal to him, personal stories to him. So it was a fascinating book because it wasn't just this one long narrative that I had to hold the line on, so to speak. It kind of the line of my, because I hadn't done too much long work, full length, long stuff.
Mm-hmm.
It would have been a bit of I think, a push to hold that sort of levels of concentration that you need to adapt a full novel, in that way. So these short projects that I could work on, each of these essays were short mini stories in and of themselves, was actually really good training for me, really good. I couldn't adapt the entire book, so I just took the stories that really spoke to me, and yeah, went with it.
Yeah, I noticed that there were some chapters that you decided. Let
Whoop,
me
your
just,
camera's gone.
yeah, I'm going to switch over. So I want to show some of the pages from Souls of Black Folk. I want to say just a few things, and then you can certainly cut in, and you know more about it than me, about W.E.B. Du Bois. Du Bois, he was an activist. He was a firebrand. He was primarily, I think, just an amazing writer. But I've been looking at stuff on YouTube and listening to him tell his story. And there's a bit of a radicalness to him going on, but quite the observer, just an amazing observer.
Yeah, he really did the work. There are a lot of people, I think, especially these days, and I count myself among them, as one who, have a lot of opinions on things, but without having that one-to-one contact with the subject. And because obviously it was very much affecting his community, he was able to sort of really pull his sleeves up and not just sit in his room and think up this stuff, but actually to go out and talk to people. And yeah, he just had this depth of knowledge of real, like I say, it was a sociologist, as more than anything else, I think, as well as a great writer, of course.
Yeah, it comes to mind that when he was in Atlanta, he wanted to really know the heart and soul of Atlanta. So he would be interviewing a cross section of people. He didn't want just people to think it's just one type of person. No, it's a whole diverse spectrum of people.
Yeah.
And W.E.B. Du Bois, he was born in 1868. He lived quite a long life, up to 1963. And I
Yeah.
like how you add the March on Washington at the beginning, because that is so
Yeah.
that is so spot on to do that.
Yeah, that was Paul's idea.
Oh,
And I think it was a really good one. Yeah. I mean, he did give me a few ideas at the beginning to sort of like to kickstart. And in fact, originally there were plans to also adapt Souls of White Folk, which was an essay that he had done outside of that collection in the book. And I guess that would have been a bit of a hors d'oeuvre or something, because I started work on that while I was reading Souls.
oh, wow.
But in the end, it for time reasons, and also it's a bit more what's the word? It's kind of like an overview. It's very diagrammatic in a way. Very there wasn't as many strong visual clues, and so it kind of in a way was detracting energy or distracting energy from the main work. So it kind of didn't end up in the book, but yeah, so Paul sort of kickstarted me with a couple of things to get going. But once we got into the meat of the book, it was just like, you do your thing.
Well, I love this one page here. It's almost completely wordless except for a few notes, and it's quite poignant.
Thank you. Yeah, the idea there was Du Bois is talking about how, as an artist, it's as a Black artist, you want to talk about your own experience, but the structures for art at that time were set up for white audiences. So how do you actually talk about your own experiences and relate them to an audience for whom it would be entirely alien? And so I had this idea of a black actor playing Hamlet, having to sort of fit a European idea of what culture is, and then a compatriot, someone else coming and sort of lowering that skull, dropping that skull, and focusing on what's actually happening. And yeah, it's a lot of the ideas for this thing. That was a great thing about this. A lot of the ideas for this thing actually came from my illustrator's brain, which kind of like is a little more sort of less directly representational, but having to then take these ideas and turn them into something visual and graphic.
Yeah.
And I loved that. I loved that it wasn't just a matter of me having to put word bubbles on characters in a room. I actually had to really think about how do I express these ideas.
The very first chapter, it begins with W.E.B. Du Bois speaking about the color line, the vast veiled double consciousness. It's like a freight train. There's all of these really provocative, meaty ideas going on, and then by chapter 2, we're talking about the Freedmen's Bureau and the missed opportunity, to put it lightly. I don't think that it was like I don't know what thoughts come to mind that part of American history.
Yeah, it was again, this book really opened my eyes to a lot of things. That there was a real plan, and that there was a, we tend to look at history through the lens of good guys and bad guys, and especially a situation like this where the injustice is so obvious. But there were people who realized that at the time and were trying to do the right thing. And organize a way in which people can get back into the workplace and begin to learn skills and so on and so forth, have their own banking. Only there was no real sort of coordination on it, and ideas would come, ideas would go. People would come into office who would then tinker with things, and it was a lost opportunity. Yeah, that is the overall feeling, but it kind of happened because there was still trying to process an enormous change in the social order while trying to fix it. I think, of course, there were malicious actors in it too. There were people who did not want African Americans to actually really integrate or really become, to raise their state, so to speak. But by and large, I think it was that there was just a kind of like there was no one captain to the ship, and lots of ideas which kind of contradicted and clashed with each other, and in the end, the whole thing kind of lost steam.
Yeah,
that's how I read it.
Well, like anything having to do with government and politics, there's the pushback can sometimes be overwhelming to keep these things from happening.
Yeah.
And then there's
that's definitely. Sorry, go on.
Oh no, let me see, where losing my place. Oh well, one of the significant things is that Du Bois gets to speak his mind on what he thinks of Booker T. Washington. He admires what he's doing, but not completely.
They were like the opposite ends of the spectrum on this thing. It's so interesting, and I have to say that as I go on, I mean, when I was younger, I would have been 100% behind Du Bois' ideas, his approach to solving the problem. They both want to solve the same problem. How do you actualize self-empowerment for Black people in a culture that had, really wasn't set up for it? Du Bois thought that through culture and through learning, you would be able to form an academic social class, which then be able to pull everyone up behind them. So they would be the teachers, they would be the leaders. So it was very important that this academic class be formed and created and had voting powers. From Booker T. Washington's point of view, which is increasingly persuasive to me, he said basically because of his past, basically he started as a slave, he was born a slave and became a businessman. He thought that those privileges or rights that the greater community enjoyed would be passed on to Blacks, or they would earn it by gaining power, by gaining skills, by gaining money, by gaining economic strength. And then they would be, there would be no way that they would be ignored. They would get power, they would have voting power, they would have their place in society. And I think Du Bois, well, definitely Du Bois. I've got to stop saying Du Bois. It's such a, he always said Du Bois. I think Du Bois was skeptical of that approach because he believed, I think, that without the rights, there is no chance for a strong economy for Black people, or a strong culture for Black people, which would underpin an economic strength for people of that, Black people of that time. So yeah, it's actually adapting his point of view on Booker T was interesting because I don't think I completely agree with it. It was, yeah, it was really interesting circumstance to be in. I thought that I would be completely lockstep, but there are a few places where I sort of go, no, I can see the other view. But you've got to be faithful to the point of view that you're adapting. So I hope I was. But I'd like to do another book on Booker T. Actually, I'd like to adapt Up From Slavery, which was his story.
Oh, wow. That makes sense.
Yeah.
And then there's the meaning of progress, which I kind of feels like a crescendo to the whole work, because it's so bittersweet and so artful.
Oh, yeah. It's amazing. It's an amazing chapter of the book. That was where I think, I agree with you. It's kind of a sweet spot between all the academic work of actually getting out there, meeting people and getting into their lives and seeing things for himself, and this kind of, this artful, this beautiful storytelling, and kind of almost, there's almost a mythic level to that chapter, because everything that's happening to those people is symbolic of what's happening to all of those people, or the entire race, inverted commas, at the time. Yeah, it was a pleasure to adapt, and yeah, I think I did some of my best stuff on that one.
And let me jump over to The Coming of John, which is quite a fun piece because it's like it is a horror story.
Yeah.
It's a comic book within a graphic novel.
Yeah. It's like an EC O. Henry sort of story, isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's how I tried to approach it. That's how I approached it. It's totally fictional, it seems, but yeah, everything that he learns is sitting in there. And he talks about some. It's a real dilemma, for people who. Okay, so Du Bois has this idea that you have to have a black elite, intellectual elite, but where are they going to come from? So he tells a story of this young man who uh, goes out into the world and having been a bit lackluster as a kid, he decides to make something of himself, and he goes and he gets educated, and then he has a real problem when he gets back home because he finds that he can't relate to the people that he used to live with. And now, on top of that, he knows before he could just assume that things were the way they were because that's the way things were. But now he has consciousness of injustice, and that is an anger in him, which he cannot he cannot express safely when he gets back home to where the social structure is very well defined. He is supposed to know his place, and so that tension builds up to a very sad but satisfying story. That was a yeah, that was great. What a great book! What a great book!
Yeah. And then it ends
Brilliant.
on, well, it ends on an even more brilliant, I suppose, piece, the sorrow songs.
Mm.
And
Yeah,
the
I
colors
actually
here are so vivid.
thank you. Yeah, it's interesting because it's the way the book ends as well, and I would have probably placed it somewhere else, but it kind of like, in a way, it's got a hopeful end to it. It actually brings light to, yeah, I guess it makes sense. Had it ended on the coming of John, it would have been a bit of a downer, to be fair. Um, but yeah, there is it's a dissection of the history of slave songs, of the spiritual songs which come from slave songs, um, and the story of the Fisk University singers who traveled around Europe, um, but also talks about the story, these songs being the story of Black people in America. And it reminds me of, I think it was Chuck D of Public Enemy who described hip hop as the CNN for Black Americans.
Mm.
And I guess this would have been, you know, the equivalent of that back in the day. Du Bois is saying exactly the same thing about, the slave songs, about the spiritual songs.
Yeah.
So yeah, it was, yeah, um, yeah, another great story to work on. These ideas are so rich.
I might be going out on a limb, but it makes me think of the Ames when they did this history of America, and it felt like it was before the internet, but they're trying to pack it with all of this information, and in some ways it seems like Du Bois is doing that. Before there's an internet, he's packing so much different information and educating people in a really compelling way.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
Well, I wanted to just ask you a few questions on things that you're working on right now, or
Mhm.
maybe you're finishing up, but there's still a long process before it finally makes it out into the world. The an indigenous people's history of the United States. What can you tell us about that?
it's a big project, but kind of condensed into 107 pages. 107 pages. It's an adaptation of Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz's book of the same name, bestseller, New York Times bestseller, which describes the whole process, well, life before colonization of the United States for the indigenous people, and the process of colonization and up to today's politics. It's a very big canvas, and lots of key figures. And yeah, it was straight from that one, straight from Souls of Black Folk, pretty much straight into Indigenous, or IFAS as I call it for short. It's a long title and yeah, it really was like, yeah, this was like boot camp. This was like, you really had to dig deep. And of course it's very emotional and harrowing material. She pulls no punches in terms of what actually happened. So yeah, it's a big project. I need probably to do something slightly lighter. I probably should do something slightly lighter afterwards to sort of like cleanse the palate, as they say. But actually, the next thing is has got its own seriousness going on as well. So it is what it is,
Sure. And then what could you tell us about Romana's Magic Hay?
Yeah, that's a project which was, after I did, well, I say after, it's still kind of ongoing, but Edge of Extinction, I'd put out some stuff out on X, then Twitter, and was contacted by an American writer who had a number of projects. He was looking for an artist. And so I looked through the list of things and I thought, oh, I'll do this this sword and sorcery thing. I kind of had it in my head that I was going to channel all this bande dessinée that I really like, the adventure stuff. Like it was really, set in certain good period art, with all the details of characters and all that sort of stuff. And it would take me out of, we're drawing cars basically and things like that, which are trickier for me. And so it's a sword and sorcery story based in ancient Rome. Yeah, it's a fun gig with monsters and it's kind of like it's been going off and on while doing these other projects. So it has been a palate cleanser in a way.
There you go. And I just want to compliment you on your newsletter, Ink Skull.
Oh, thank you.
If that's something people haven't gotten on their radar, they just need to grab it because it's so packed with valuable information for cartoonists and for fans of the comics medium and pop culture and whatever else you feel like putting in. You got your own way of doing it.
Oh, I really appreciate that. That feels really good to hear that, because it's actually an important part of my story in a way. The life of any artist is a mental minefield, quite often. You gotta have a lot of self-confidence and or at least you've got to find ways to trick yourself into having enough confidence to get the work done and get the work out there in front of people. And I've had, some experiences through life, which, like everyone, has sort of knocked me and made me think about life. And I wanted to find a good vehicle to express those things, as well as talk about creativity and art and the stuff that I like and the stuff that inspires me. And I thought about at those times when I was like least inspired or feeling low and needed some sort of help, it would have been great to have somebody trying to trying to do that anyway, and the whole newsletter thing has become, I've noticed, a thing for a lot of cartoonists now. They're letting people know about what they're getting up to.
Oh, yeah.
And I thought I would do that too, but add this extra level of stuff that I picked up, which I hope helps people as much as it's helped me. So yeah, I'm really, really pleased that you like it, and yeah, I'm going to keep going. Yeah.
So in an Indigenous people's history of the United States, when do you anticipate that coming out, or that's still in the works?
That's actually all done now. All the principal artwork is done. Cover was the last thing, and that's finished. That's due out on October 1st.
Okay, wonderful.
Yeah, yeah. So there are going to be a number of online events because I'm in Tasmania. Um, it's going to be difficult to do sort of like in-person things, but you never know. That's still a possibility. But there are a number of events coming up, and I will make those clear in the newsletter and online. And yeah, if I thought it through, I would have written down and sort of made mention of it. I should have done. But yeah.
And this is the book we've been talking about, Souls of Black Folk, published by Rutgers University Press. Well, thank you, Paul, for doing this interview.
Thank you very much, Henry. That was really, really lovely of you to reach out.